Uh, it occurs to me that you might be wondering, you're like, hey, Barlin, we talked about programs using built-in types, but sometimes we need to make our own, and we might make union types, we might make compound types, structs. Great. And then you just sort of said, hey, when we learned about the template for each of those, and then you said, hey, by the way, when we make a struct, a union of structs, then the template is a little bit different. And we follow the template for a union, but then in each branch we threw in the template for a struct. But what about, that's a union of structs, what if I had a struct of unions? What if I had a union of unions, a struct of structs? Yeah, and so the answer for that is going to be no different. Don't do anything there. In fact, stop and call helper functions rather than do too much in one function. So what do I mean by that? So first of all, let's talk about what is a struct of unions. What would that be? A struct of, a class where I have several fields and some of the fields are themselves union types. Well, the template says if I have a struct, the template says pull out the fields and work with those. Great, so I'll pull out the fields. How do you work with something that is a union type? Well, you have a con with the right number of branches. Don't do that inside this current template, okay? So if I had, what were some of those union types we talked about? We talked about what, a game result and a taxable income entry and a stoplight color, things like that. So if somehow, for some reason, I had a struct that had several fields, or one of the fields was a taxable income entry and one was a game result and one was a stoplight color, then yeah, great. My template says pull those three fields out, but don't go ahead and have a cond for the stoplight color and then another cond with 3 branches for the taxable income entry and then another cond with 5 branches for the game result, all in that template. No, that's too much. People talk about one function, one purpose. Don't have one function try to do too much. This is what they mean. Don't have a function that tries to handle all of those. It just handles the overall struct, and it will call helpers to deal with the individual fields if those individual fields are complicated and need to cover a bunch of different cases. So struct of unions is just a struct, and you don't do anything more. You pull out the fields and you call functions on that type. There might be another helper function. So a union of unions, does that even make sense? Isn't that the same as a union? Is it a union? I have something where I have it's either a stoplight color or a game result or a taxable income entry. Oh, I could have that. I have one field and it's one of those 3 things. Each of those is itself one of 3 things or 5 things or 2 things or whatever. Again, if I had a union where some of the branches were themselves unions, I'm just going to have the union where I have a cond with the right number of branches, and then I'll go ahead on the right-hand side if I want to deal with that. If it's, again, a complicated thing, don't nest a cond inside of a cond to do this template processing. Have your union be a cond with the right number of branches, and then call a helper function if you need to do something complicated. And finally, this demo with a struct of structs, because this is something you're familiar with from probably the end of your first CS1 class, your introductory programming class. You talked about objects and had an object had fields, and then eventually it was sort of a slightly bigger conceptual leap about encapsulation, saying, hey, I have 3 fields, and each of those fields are other classes that I've written. Yeah, so a struct of structs, a class whose fields are objects of other classes. Same thing. Okay, so here's an example. We'll go ahead and make a collector's edition. A collector's edition is it's 3 things. It's a DVD and a book, and it's a bunch of pages of extra fancy artwork. Okay, so at least for our purposes, that's what we'll say a collector's edition is. Okay, so data definition, define struct. Hey, I have exactly 3 things. I have 1 disk, 1 book, and 1. I'll use a nat num to represent the extra art pages. And again, just remember in this data definition for a struct, we have the defined struct, which is the actual code that makes Racket go ahead and create the constructor and the selectors. And then we go ahead, and it'll be a comment, but we still want this. We'll have the signature of the constructor. This takes in a DVD, a book, and a nat num that's what these three fields are, the types. So I need to know both of those. Again, I need to know that, hey, I know I have three fields here, but what types are these things? If I'm not psychic and don't know what BK is supposed to mean, oh, it's something of type book. Okay. So, examples of the data. Let's go ahead and make a collector's edition for the Fellowship of the Ring. So make a collector's edition is going to be a disc and a book. The disc will be that make DVD. I copied and pasted that from above the make book. So I went ahead and made a book by J.R.R. Tolkien. Pretty sure that one, Fellowship of the Ring was longer than the Two Towers, but not as long as Return of the King. So yeah, I think that was the one that was 324 pages. And it certainly is still in copyright. Okay. And then maybe the collector's edition has 15 pages of fancy art. Okay, so that's my example. It's kind of a mouthful. I'm going to go ahead and give this a name. So when I say examples of the data, this is the part in orange is all I'm looking for. But if you want to give it a name using define, well, that's a wholly independent issue, and you can certainly give a name to any value you like. Okay, so let's give a name to that one. The Fellowship of the Ring Collector's Edition. Tafturka. Okay, what is the template for a collector's edition? We have a struct with three fields. Pull out those three fields. Stop. This is our template. Now I know that this here is a DVD, and that has itself three fields or four fields in that. And I guess I could go ahead and take that orange part, copy and paste it 4 times, and then call my 4 getters. That again is doing too much all in one function. So, okay. Okay, so let's look at the function. I want to write a function. Let's just keep it real here. Well, kind of real, given these data definitions, but ripoff. Ripoff takes in a collector's edition and makes a new collector's edition that we're going to go and sell in the black market for Bitcoin, which is untraceable. So, yeah, you give me a collector's edition and a number, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and the book that's inside the collector's edition, I'm going to go ahead and call derive from to make my own open source extension of it. I'm just going to staple blank pages onto it and call it art. Okay. I'm going to put the author as anonymous because I don't want to be tracked on this. I'll add some pages to it, so that num will be the number of pages I add to my ripoff. Okay. And then for the DVD, I'm going to go ahead and, gosh, I have a whole warehouse full of copies of the Emoji Movie I'm trying to get rid of. So I'm going to throw that in along with this, the book that I've derived. So here's my stub function. Define ripoff takes in a collector's edition and a number of new blank pages. The fact that they're blank doesn't tie into anything, but I'm just letting you know that I'm not going to put any effort into this project here. Once I've sold it, I'm out of there. Be with my Bitcoin down in the Bahamas. Okay, so if you rip off the Fellowship of the Rings Collector's Edition and try to add 10 more pages, what are we going to get? We're going to get a new Collector's Edition that has, the movie will be the Emoji Movie, the artwork will be the 15 pages that we originally had for the Fellowship of the Rings, and then 10 more blank pages. And then what will be the book that I include? Again, to avoid copyright things, I'm going to take the book that was the original Collector's Edition, the Fellowship of the Ring, and I'm going to do I already had a function derived from that added this many pages and added this as the new author. So that will be my my ripped off collector's edition. Okay, so go ahead and see if you can pause and write the code for this following. So the question is, does this follow from the template just fine? Let's go ahead and find out. You go ahead and pause and write that, and I will go ahead and not have to pause. I will continue as if the time stream were totally uninterrupted. And I'm going to replace, oh, by the way, let me just run my test cases right now with that stub to make sure I'm not missing any open brackets and parens. And I get no signature violations. I have a check failure. This thing with the Emoji Movie didn't, yeah, well, I haven't written ripoff yet, so I expect to fail. Everything else went fine. Okay, so take the template, paste it in there as my stub function. What do I want to do with the collector's edition disc? Oh, that's it. Let's see. The movie I want to replace with the Emoji Movie. Okay, so let's go ahead and, oops, this whole thing emoji movie, and then the book I want to make a derive from. And if I've done my test case correctly, this here is going to, the test case almost writes my code for me. I'm going to derive from with whatever the book that I had and anonymous and 10. Okay? And then what I'm going to do with the number of pages of artwork, I'm going to add on to it. And it's going to be the original number that I had, 15 plus 10 more, which is the thing that's being passed in. Escape right arrow, skips over that entire expression, and I go ahead and put in, well, let's do a copy paste. Okay. And what do I do with this new book, this new DVD, this new pile of fancy artwork? I'm going to make a new collector's edition out of it. Make collector's edition. By the way, one thing I'll mention about indentation, a little side note for a second, you can fast forward 30 seconds if you don't want to hear this. I don't mind a derive from took in 3 arguments, and I have them here on 3 lines. If you want to put them on a single line, great. If they fit on a single line, in fact, it's probably more readable to do that. So, perhaps, arguably. That's fine. Don't do this. Don't have 2 lines for 3 arguments. Either have it each argument on its own line, or all on 1 line, but not in between. Okay. By the way, if you're wondering about those keystrokes, I did escape right to skip over that entire S expression. Then escape space goes ahead and collapses all the space after the caret and joins up with the next expression. So, okay. If you're ever curious about keyboard shortcuts, go in the Dr. Reka menus and look through those. There's a bunch of things there. Okay, so it looks like we're good. Let's go ahead and see if we pass this test case here. Oh, I have a wrong, I missed a closed paren somewhere in there. Now, if you've been paying close attention, there is actually an error in here. We'll see if this test case patches it. What is this? Check expected. Counted an error and instead of the following expected value. Okay. So I know why this is, but I thought this error wouldn't evince until later. So we got an error. We didn't get the expected value. We can see what the expected value was if I want to track down which test case it was. It's the one with the emoji movie, so it's a result of ripoff, I guess. But book title expects a book was given a DVD. Okay, this pink error is the expression sort of, well, the error is either right here or it followed from here. It turns out it followed from here. The stuff in black is not where the error is. The stuff in black is a code coverage tool. The stuff in black was never, ever, ever run or looked at. So, in particular, it started to call derive from, but it never made it to even looking at the emoji movie or this here. So, yeah, so how do we track this error down? Book title given a book. And I think that the last expression that wasn't covered, I thought these all would get evaluated. It actually occurred in here in the derive from, okay? So, derive from, and so here's now, again, what the error message was. Book title was expected a book. We gave it a DVD. So, oh, here we are. Collector's edition disc. I passed in collector's edition. I should grab the book, what I'm calling the derive from. This was the disc that I got replaced. Okay, so now I think we're okay. I still have a problem that we're going to have to come back to. It's illustrating here. Looks like everything's good. Great. Okay. One more quick function. Let's go off and verify title. So what does verify title do? By the way, I defined the emoji movie down here. It was made in 2017. 86 minutes. Oh. Okay. 87 too long. Verify title. Here's what I want for verify title. Give me a collector's edition. Make sure that the book and the disc enclosed both have the same title. Probably should be the case. Okay, so It's a good sanity check that I might write on these things. Maybe I'll want to build it into the constructor eventually, enforce that this happens to be true. Okay. So if I take my Fellowship of the Ring and call a verify title on that, I expect that this function to return true. If I call verify title, but I've ripped off the Fellowship of the Ring, then yeah, the movie title and the book title will disagree and I will get false here. So can I go ahead and write this? I'll put in the template. Will this work? Should be. So now here's my point. I said for the template, you go ahead and pull out the fields and then call helper functions on these. Don't go ahead and pull out all the fields inside each of these three structures themselves, or two of these two are structures. Don't go ahead and pull out those apart and then have all that sitting in your template. That's doing too much. Call a helper function like we call derive from. This is awesome. I just called derive from on this particular input, and that's fine. That's about the right amount of work to do in this function. Okay, what do we want to do? Let's see, we don't need to carry out the number of pages of art for verify title. I have this here. I want to go ahead and I want to pull out, hey, pull out the disc DVD title of this thing and pull out the book title of that thing. Okay. And see, so this was a collector's edition. This part here was a DVD, and this thing here is a string. Likewise, we went from just a collector's edition to a book to a string. So now I have two strings sitting here, and like, oh, I just want to see if these two strings are equal. What's my point on this? Now you might be saying, hey, Barland, you said don't go ahead and pull out the fields of the, once we went ahead and had done this, pull out the fields of the collector's edition, don't pull out the subfields of that on that. Here's my claim. I'm just calling one helper function on it. If I only call one helper function on it, whether it's make book, or sorry, whether it's derived from being the helper function, where I'm passing it the field of the collector's edition, or it's DVD title. Here I'm viewing DVD title as not part of the template. I'm like, hey, that's just the one thing I want to do with this disk here. I'm going to use it in one way. I call a helper function that does that one way. Okay, so that's all I'm saying here. So now I can go ahead, but I will talk about a subtle bug here. We'll see if we can crack it down. So now I run this, and I'm getting an error, okay? And it's similar to the one we had before. Well, that's kind of weird that it's coming again. Check expected encountered an error instead of false. And what is it? DVD title. Expected DVD was given a book. Well, did I goof up again? DVD title was given... Wait a minute. DVD title was given a book. I called Collector's Edition disc on this thing. I didn't call Collector's Edition book. So I don't understand. The error is coming from here. It's where the expected answer was false. Okay, or even true. It was this here was the one causing the test case, and it came up here. And this is what's failing. Okay, well why is this thing? I passed it, the Fellowship of the Ring, and when I pulled out its disk field, I was getting a book. Oh, did I make... So here's the error. When I went back up and I made the Fellowship of the Ring example, and you may have noticed this at the time, but, well, no, okay. Disk, book, extra art. I did that in the right order. I have a disk, and then a book, and then extra art. So that part seems okay. Oh, and actually, if I look at, here's another clue. When I look at the error message, what the expected one was false, actually. So here, what's kind of interesting is that this one passed, okay? This one failed, the one whose expected value was false. So this ripoff. Now, wait a minute, we already had check expects for ripoff. Ripoff should have been okay. It turned out it's not. So here's an example where my test cases maybe weren't good enough, or a mistake in my test case propagated through into my code and therefore wasn't caught, and that's what really happened. what happened. In ripoff, when I went ahead and you may have noticed it when I was writing this, both the test case and in the code, that I called Make Collector's Edition, and I passed it, I'm supposed to pass it a disk and a book and a number of pages. I passed it a book and a disk and a number of pages. Okay? And I did that here in my test case. I did that here. Because I did it in my test case and in my code, this was not caught. Okay? And now, from Java, you're saying, well, wait a minute, Make Collector's Edition, shouldn't that be a type error? I'm supposed to pass it something of type DVD, and I passed it something of type book. Shouldn't have the constructor have complained? Ideally, yes. Yeah. Since we're only doing dynamic typing here, no static typing, it didn't happen until runtime. And in particular, it didn't happen until we made the object with the fields in the wrong types in the fields. And then later I pulled it out and then tried to use it. That's when we discovered this error. And this is one place where I'm like, you know, that I really should, the computer should have told me about this error sooner. Read about contracts. Okay, again, I'm not requiring it for this class, but go to the lectures page, and there's a link near the bottom of extra things you can have, extra tips and so on, and there's one about using contracts. And in particular, you can actually, the contracts that we're putting in comments, things like this, you can actually put that in code. Even your struct, you can actually have it as code saying, hey, these fields must pass the predicate book ? And let's go up here where I defined here. It should pass the predicate DVD ? And book ? And natnum ? Those are actual functions. And I can actually make this be real code, see that file for details. And then when I call the constructor, if these preconditions weren't met, it would go ahead and signal an error at that point. So it's still at runtime. I'm in a dynamic typing system, racket, even with contracts. It will happen at runtime, but it will happen sooner at runtime because I will have told the constructor what sort of types it really needs to be given, or every function I will be told exactly. And so at the moment it gets called with the wrong types, that's when the error will get triggered. I wish that would have happened here. This is a hard thing to track down, okay? So that's why I wanted to go through this example. What was the problem both in here, and actually the first time I did this, I did this unintentionally. This was not an intentional error the first time I did it. So I need to go and fix it here. And the first time I did it, I fixed it here. Oops. What happened? Escape Control-T is what I want. So there is a keyboard shortcut, by the way. Control-T transposes two characters. Not too, and it's kind of useful. That's actually an Emacs character binding. Control-T, transpose two characters. There's another one, Escape Control-T, and that says transpose the two expressions on either side of the point. So it's going to swap the emoji movie with the derived from. Yeah, so that's pretty handy. Okay, so I'm going to swap it here, and I want to, and if I don't do it again, I'm now get an error. I'll go back and be getting an error in my check expects for ripoff, because I changed the check expect without changing the code, fixing the same error in the code. Now I have it fixed both in ripoff. So I thought ripoff was going okay because I passed my check expect. No, when I did the check expect, I was already off on the wrong track. And in fact, it was because my check expect was wrong that when I wrote the code, I copied that same error there. So be careful when you write check expects. Use that contract feature if you want to catch errors sooner as well. Okay. All 17 tests pass, and now we can finish the video. Woohoo!